Good evening. I'm Alfred Lambremont Webre of newsinsideout.com. And after much reflection and input from colleagues and others who are writing me and asking me questions, I've decided to do an explanation of why I exposed, to give the story of why I exposed Kevin Annett and ITCCS.com and what that process was and what I expect the outcome to be, which is clearing the way to create a positive future. And this today is Tuesday, December 23rd, 2014. It's about 7:30 p.m. in Pacific time. And what prompted the specific statement tonight, that is it being tonight, was yet another public statement by the quote ITCCS Central Directorate in Brussels. Now, people should understand that we've done an inquiry into the Central Directorate in Brussels. We've gone to the address provided by the Central Directorate. All that was given was a major public avenue and a postal code. It's like if you gave a zip code and you said, zip code, 5th Avenue, New York. It's a major avenue in Brussels. I spoke to an associate of mine in Brussels, and it's right, that avenue is right near their home, and it's a huge avenue. It's incidentally, it's where the offices of Interpol are, the offices of the UN are, the offices of all of the major New World Order agencies are on that avenue. But no numbers get given, and all of the names that have been given by Kevin and Annett, including George Defort, for ITCCS, alleged ITCCS personnel in Brussels are bogus. These individuals do not exist, and our textual analysis of the emails that the so-called George Defort sent me, or that another person on the ITCCS directorate sent me, is that the emotional tone, the text, is identical to Kevin Annett, i.e. Kevin Annett has populated his fabrication called the International Tribunal into Crimes of Church and State by bogus fictional pseudonyms that allegedly are based in Brussels, who in fact don't exist. But he says, after we published newsinsideout.com, an ITCCS juror, Alex Hunter of Vancouver, was accompanied by another witness, and that is a residential school survivor, a member of the Burrard First Nations band here in Vancouver, Watsek. And the juror will read from their testimony later, and you can review their interview, stated that there was no ITCCS trial, that in fact Kevin Annett included Alex Hunter's name as a juror, just notified him later, and then said that the trial had taken place. And they were completely surprised. I.e., Kevin Annett is a person who, if you assume he is a private person, then he is what you would call a serial liar or deeply disturbed psychopathological person. If you assume that he is a globalist operative and an intelligence operative, then you can understand his modus operandi even better. But he writes, for the record, neither of the two individuals making this claim, Alex Hunter and Watzek, we never said that Watzek was a juror, have ever been jurors with either court case conducted by the International Common Law Court of Justice in Brussels. Well, I'm sorry, but the jurors were, and you appointed them. So I would like to then really explain here, give a note on the past, what occurred with ITCCS and my relationship with Kevin Annett over the course of about 10 years, and the immediate past, what caused me to lose trust in him, and when that occurred, and then what the future is. And then I'd like to go into some of the highlights on the session that we did with ITCCS ICLCJ juror Alex Hunter and Watzek. But first, the past, a note on the ITCCS investigation. And I'm sorry that there's confusion regarding ITCCS and Annett. I interviewed Annett as the sole spokesperson for of ITCCS for 3 years, and I took on faith many statements he made because of my 10-year relationship with him. I first met Annett at Vancouver Co-op Radio, where my program there, the Monday Brown Bagger, ended as his program began. That is, we were on Mondays, and as my program ended, his program began, so I would hear him start his program as I was leaving. What's very significant to me is that all of the progressive programs, including my program, were suddenly terminated by a Bilderberger takeover of Vancouver Co-op Radio. And that was occasioned at the same time as a crisis caused by the termination of Annett's program over the Picton affair. There were Aboriginal women who were being murdered at the Picton farm. And there was a question of Annett, and apparently there was a whole issue whether he was framed doing inappropriate things, having sex on a table in the station that was videotaped. And in that case, there had been a prostitute hired to imitate him and to come and have sex with a person who had a jacket on like his and looked like him from the back. Well, all of this caused a great commotion at the station that conveniently covered the fact that all progressive programs were axed at the same time. How convenient. After that, I left Vancouver Co-op Radio and formed Exopolitics TV, first Exopolitics Radio, and then Exopolitics TV. And on September 14th, 2011, right before that, Annett approached me, and that was the date of my first interview, to interview him on his new project, the ITCCS, presuming that I supported him because we had been terminated by Co-op Radio by the Bilderberger takeover. Now, unbeknownst to me, as I learned a few days ago, Annett had told a now colleague of mine, broadcaster Mel Vey of Holland, he had told her, quote, "I do not have any respect for Alfred. I think he is a Vatican agent. I am just using him because he has a loyal audience base." And I was told those very words by Mel Vey, who I believe just a few days ago. So that is the kind of cold-blooded calculation that that Annett has about the people that he uses. He's a very sly operator. So from that time, I broadcast him. He would call me up frequently and say, Alfred, I just have breaking news. Can we have an interview? And I really focused on other things. And I said, sure, because I thought it was, a really good cause. My wife, Jerry, had always been suspicious of him and always urged me to terminate my relationship with him. And I was resistant because I understood that the Vatican was a dark place. As I published before, my uncle Richard Chisholm was a Jesuit, and he was an assistant to Pedro Arrupe, the Jesuit Black Pope. In fact, you could consider him the deputy Black Pope. And Pedro Arrupe was the darkest Jesuit Black Pope in history, the only one that was fired as Jesuit Black Pope because he attempted to assassinate the white Pope, that is Pope John Paul II, because Pope John Paul II was going to shut the Jesuits down. So that's how bad my uncle was deputy to as deputy Black Pope. The way that I see that is that I was, in the design of this incarnation, I incarnated into this family where I would see, I would know that this is real because I had an Uncle Richard who I was deeply suspicious of. I broke with a Catholic Church when I entered university, and I visited my Uncle Richard once in Rome during the reign of Pope John Paul II. I went to see him at Borgo Santo Spirito, which are the Jesuit headquarters. He came out down to reach me. We went out to have lunch. And as he came out, an African man went by us, and my uncle spat, and he went, negro porco, meaning the black man is a pig. And I was just shocked. I was literally shocked. And I said, why did you do that? He says, because here in Rome, we call all Africans pigs. They are a pig race. And from that moment, I saw that some evil force had taken over my uncle. I really did not know him that well. And, but I'm here reporting that, yes, that's what goes on with the Jesuit hierarchy. On October, so that's the background of how I was interviewing Annett, because I knew that something is amiss in the Vatican and in the Jesuits, and I knew this from personal experience. And I knew this because I had been in Catholic boarding schools, sent there from the age of 6 by my parents who lived in Cuba. And I had been at one school, St. Leo, for 7th and 8th grade, run by the Benedictines, where Pope Ratzinger was Pope. And there, a number of the monks had to be kicked out in the middle of the term because they had sexually abused a number of the young students that were in the boarding school. So I've been privy to this a good deal of my life. Now, on October 28th, 2014, while I was in the midst of doing my work and interviewing Annett, when he would call, a woman friend of mine who Annett had all of a sudden appointed her as administrator of the ITCCS Facebook group, which I had founded and was an administrator of. And I became suspicious because she was a friend of mine. And I said, why would he appoint her all of a sudden to be administrator here, I knew that several months earlier, he had appointed a young Aboriginal woman to be administrator there. And suddenly she became his traveling companion in Europe. And so I remarked to Jerry, I said, well, it looks like Kevin is becoming like, you know, a cult leader where he's taking attractive women to Europe as traveling companions, you know, out of the ITCCS funds, I guess. You know, so on October 28, 2014, this woman friend of mine came to me with a report that Annett had been simultaneously romancing several women in different parts of the planet via internet. This was, you know, right after I had noticed a few months earlier that this young, beautiful Aboriginal woman had suddenly been appointed administrator, had traveled to Europe with him as a, you know, as a traveling companion. She really didn't know very much about what ITCCS did. And suddenly she had gone off the screen. I guess he'd gotten what he needed out of her. And then my woman friend told me that Annett was engaging in unethical interpersonal relationships with multiple women. This was around October 28, 2014, and in early November. By coincidence, at that time in early November, Annett was scheduled to come right here in this studio at my home for an interview in early November 2014. I consulted with my wife, Jerry, the night before. Her advice was terminate him. And that was my advice going in. So I confronted him beforehand. I went out to the patio out here. We couldn't meet in the living room because my wife had a psychotherapy client at the time in her office. And I confronted him here on the back porch. And I said to him that my friend had called me and had stated that you have been having improper and multiple romantic relationships over the internet with multiple women. Annett then began to engage in very aggressive accusations against my friend, who I had known. She runs a spiritual center here in British Columbia. He accused her of being a government agent, whereas I know that she's a healer. At that very moment, I lost trust in Annett. However, there was something in me that I didn't follow the advice of my wife. I decided to give him one more chance as a broadcaster because of the importance of of the public work that he was doing. But I had lost trust in him as I sensed he was deliberately lying to me for deceptive purposes. And so then I decided then that as a matter of due diligence, I should request an independent interview, which I had been wanting to do with the so-called George Dufort of ITCCS Brussels, who Annett had indicated had functioned as a coordinator of ITCCS Brussels, i.e. more or less as a court clerk, which as a former judge on the Kuala Lumpur War Crimes Tribunal, I know that's the person who you go to. They know all the judges. Dufort had been emailing, the Dufort persona had been emailing back and forth with me I would know what questions to ask him to begin to verify the proceedings, the evidence, etc., in a way that would not compromise, quote, the security reasons that Annett said none of the judges could be interviewed, and that George Defort, his security, that was a pseudonym because George Defort's security was at risk. I told George Defort, I told Annett that we could interview George Defort anonymously as we had interviewed Cobra, and we had altered Cobra's voice for securities purposes. And over the past several months, I have received emails purportedly written by George Defort. I also knew that some researchers had concluded that George Defort, like Jeremiah Jourdain, were fictitious personas that Annett had made up in an effort to make his organization real. Now, at that point, simultaneously, Canadian researcher Heather Martin published interviews with two women, one in New Zealand and one in the UK, in England, whom Annett was simultaneously romancing at the same time that he was romancing my friend here in Canada. All three of them, he was romancing them all three unethically. And a person in a high position of ethical trust, such as the head of an international tribunal like this is very suspicious behavior, especially the woman in one of the women stated, and asked him, how does a man like, how do you have all this time to chat up all these women and still be carrying on all these investigations? Because apparently that's what he did, is he spent a lot of time chatting up and romancing a lot of women online. And so you wonder, well, what are you doing with your time? Are you working? So I made a written request for an interview with George Defort. Annett then escalated my reasonable journalistic request to interview. I mean, he used to welcome, he loved it when I would request an interview of him. He would jump up, salivating like a seal, and come here to this office, or we do it via Skype. But as soon as I said I wanted an interview with George Defort, Annett escalated into a public hostile response, indicating that I would be the target of a tribunal and a grand jury starting in January 2015 in Vancouver. Isn't that interesting? Hence, I issued a protective order after consulting with my wife, and to protect my home and the 10 people in it here, including elementary and secondary age students, from being threatened by the grand jury and the Republic of Canada. At that point, I assumed it was a gang. Mandate and the protective order, which is online, issued by sovereign citizens of this house, mandating no contact and prohibiting them from coming within 100 meters of my house. NewsInsideOut.com, moreover, is now developing and will, once we have concluded the investigation, publishing evidence that Annett manipulated up to $150,000 over the course of 20 years from one such woman to support his lifestyle in the ITCCS of jet setting around with multiple women in Europe, riding his fabricated ITCCS. And that constitutes criminal fraud and criminal breach of trust, which are criminal offenses. NewsInsideOut.com has yet to receive verification that ITCCS Brussels personnel or the ITCCS Brussels court exists. In fact, when we just asked for an interview, we were threatened with a grand jury proceeding. And moreover, we have received preliminary information that Annett's principal and only public European witness for the ITCCS, Toos of Holland, that her testimony has been impeached, that is false testimony. And we'll be making that public. So here we have none of the witnesses of the testimony so-called made public by Annett. You know, the summaries, the slips. Oh, this guy did this. Oh, this guy did that. You know, by no witnesses, except there's one that Toos came forward from Holland. But now we have a source in Holland that has impeached her testimony as false. So there are no witnesses at all. Now, in the days since we began publishing this expose of Annett and the ITCCS, Annett then began publishing defamatory and private information in an effort to, I don't know, what's he trying to do? Defame me as being on the take from the national security state? That he could have only been privy to if he had been fed by surveillance, by intelligence agent, by handlers, surveillance within the national security state. He wrote on my Facebook wall that my wife Jerry and I live in a lavish $4,800 a month mansion in Vancouver. Now, when he first visited our home here to be interviewed here, the first thing he asked me when he walked in, which I thought was kind of rude, he asked, "What do you pay in rent?" Well, I didn't tell him. You know, it's none of his business. And Annett could have only gotten that private information from government surveillance, since it's private information. And Annett has known very well for 3 years, because we had it both at our prior home, at which we paid even more rent, and which was where the mortgage was foreclosed by the bank, we found out, on direct orders from the Obama White House because of our activities. So we had to move with 10 people in the summer of 2014. And my wife Jerry looked at over 30 houses. And through a miracle, we found this one that was willing to accept 10 people and 3 animals, 2 dogs and a cat. And it was a total miracle that we're here. And what Annett has known for 3 years, and he chose to withhold, is that there are 10 people living here in our spacious home as a collective. We've been together as a collective. And we have graduate students at UBC. We have people that started out as graduate students that now work in the IT industry here. We have a family with its children. By splitting the rent and utilities, we have access to a beautiful home at a very reasonable rent each. My Social Security check, which is my principal income, covers my monthly portion of the rent. So much for Annett's lie that I'm being paid by the Illuminati to expose the truth by him. It's my social, I'm retired, I'm 72 years old. My Social Security check, where I worked hard all my life, is what covers my rent, because we have a collective of 10 people that splits the rent. Now, if that is not the actions of an agent got fed the confidential information of my rent on my private home in Vancouver, which is my private business. I don't know what it is. In the course of following through on due diligence as the alternative media, which we have a right to do, we have been attacked and distorted by Annett and either shill or sheeple followers. Our articles exposing Annett's, this is at newsinsideout.com, exposing Annett's breach of trust, compulsive lying, financial fraud, and shady involvement in child trafficking issues will be appearing in the coming weeks and months at newsinsideout.com. Our working hypothesis is that one of the functions of ITCCS is to displace and discredit any genuine citizen effort in this field and to prevent the citizens from coming together. Zbigniew Brzezinski, who is the author of this strategy, is called Prevent the Barbarians from Gathering. And that's the strategy behind Annett and the ITCCS. Now, as to the future, we have a positive view of the future. As we've said, as independent witnesses come forward to testify on issues of child trafficking, child genocide, child sacrifice by rings in the monarchies, governments, parliaments, churches, courts, banks, intelligence agencies, military, police, mainstream media, in the satanic multi-generational families, newsinsideout.com will report their testimony, as we did with ITCCS juror Alex Hunter and with Burrard First Nations band residential school survivor Watsek. Moreover, an independent transhumanist agenda war crimes tribunal is being formed and established in Brussels. For more details, please see warcrimestribunal.org. That is www.warcrimestribunal.org. And that War Crimes Tribunal was announced at a conference against covert harassment held in Brussels on November 20th, 2014. And once the evidence started to come out exposing Kevin and Annett, the organizers of the tribunal, Magnus Olsson in Sweden, Melanie Vritjan in Brussels, former Belgian Member of Parliament Laurent Louis in Brussels, and myself in Vancouver, Canada, consulted each other and decided that Kevin and Annett was not fit to be a part of the transhumanist agenda war crimes tribunal, and he has been ejected from that tribunal. So this exposure came just in time. By the evidence, it appears that the ITCCS is a fabrication. Some investigators think that Kevin and Annett is a globalist operative. In that case, if that is true, the ITCCS is a globalist fabrication to displace, scatter, and retard community and self-sovereign restoration of authentic society, authentic human society, and its genuine institutions from the transhumanist agenda. We do not know which part of the stories and fabrications that Kevin and Annett has told is factual and which is lies. It's impossible to tell which is disinformation or distortion by Annett or his handlers, if there are such. So that, that is why we have given our pledge. Now, if you go onto newsinsideout.com, you will see, you will come to an article, and we are reprinting this, the transcript of this entire broadcast in the link to the transcript in the video description of this video. And I would like to read significant parts of the article that appeared today at newsinsideout.com. It appeared on December 22nd, entitled "Breaking News, ITCCS Juror Alex Hunter. There was no ITCCS ICLCJ trial held of the UK Queen and Pope Ratzinger, as reported by Kevin Annett. The reported, quote, trial was a Kevin Annett fabrication." In an exclusive interview with newsinsideout.com's Alfred Lambremont Webre, ITCCS juror Alex Hunter, accompanied by residential school survivor Watsek of the Burrard First Nations band, stated that Kevin Annett did not convene a tribunal for a 2012 trial of Pope Ratzinger, UK Queen Elizabeth Windsor, Canadian Prime Minister Harper, and others for child genocide and child trafficking of First Nations children in Canada. Kevin Annett never served any jury notices, evidence, instructions, or held a 2012 trial in which he, Alex Hunter, or his fellow jurors participated, says ITCCS and International Common Law Court of Justice former juror Alex Hunter. Quote, "I found out about the so-called 2012 trial of the Dirty 30, i.e. the UK Queen, Pope Ratzinger, Prime Minister Harper, and others, from the verdicts that Kevin Annett was issuing via email and on the ITCCS website. Kevin Annett is a screenwriter, and we are characters in his fictional court trials and verdicts," end of quote. Annett fabricated 2012 trial of UK Queen, Pope Ratzinger, and Prime Minister Harper. ITCCS ICLCJ juror Alex Hunter states in his interview that Kevin Annett never sent any information pertaining to this case number 1, this notice, or further instructions to him or other citizen jurors he knows, as stated on the ITCCS website. On Monday, November 5th, 2012 at 6:30 p.m. GMT, Kevin Annett posted the following notice on the ITCCS website: "Public announcement and instructions to citizen jurors, Brussels, November 5th, 2012, 6:30 p.m. GMT. The first evidence in the opening case in the docket of our court is now posted online for examination and verdict by our citizen jurors in the world community. It is accessible through the YouTube link and posted in this email. The first posting addresses the evidence of intentional genocide by the churches and government of Canada and the Crown of England and the Vatican, according to the first 3 of defined crimes in the indictment. The final 2 crimes will be addressed in the second online posting of this case, to occur around November 15, 2012. Further instructions will be issued to our citizen jurors and to other court officers, like George Defort, who doesn't exist. We urge the world community to follow the evidence and participate in the sentencing and enforcement proceedings of the court that will follow the verdict after the other 4 cases in the docket. It's a screenplay, folks. Moreover, the ITCCS, end of quote. Moreover, ITCCS/ICLCJ juror Alex Hunter states that he and the fellow jurors he knows were never called on to sit as a tribunal and reach a verdict around the specific evidence that Kevin Annett presents on his website. This notice by Kevin Annett on his website regarding this trial and verdict is, according to juror Alex Hunter, a fabrication and fraud by Kevin Annett. The International Common Law Court of Justice, case number 1, Genocide in Canada, convened as a lawfully recognized tribunal of conscience in Brussels in the fall of 2012, and issuing its final verdict on February 25th, 2013. Now, I know what convene means. You've got to bring the court together, and it has to be legitimate, and these people have to exist, and you have to have a process. The common law court named and indicted 30 defendants for perpetrating or concealing genocide in Canada against Indigenous people. These defendants included then Pope Benedict Joseph Ratzinger, former Cardinal Tarcísio Bertone, Elizabeth Windsor, Queen of England, and Canadian Prime Minister Stephen Harper. After an exhaustive presentation of the evidence of crimes by church and state in Canada, this is by Annett, at best, reading some of the documents in his bedroom on a video. There is no court. And a refusal by the defendants to respond or refute the evidence. All of the defendants were found guilty of criminal conspiracy and genocide and were sentenced in absentia to 25 years in prison and the forfeit of all the wealth and property of their estates and institutions. Citizen arrest warrants were issued, and on August 4, 2013, the Vatican and Crown of England were declared to be transnational criminal bodies under international law and were lawfully disestablished. The complete evidence that indicted these defendants and their institutions, along with all of the court documents and warrants, are contained herein. The International Common Law Court of Justice is proceeding with other cases during 2014 and beyond. End of quote. Well, we have all of that footnoted in the article so you can go and see. Assassination of Steve Mass, sovereign verifier and residential school survivor. He's the closest friend of Watzek, who you met. In this video, Alex Hunter and Watzek talk about the possible connection to what appears to be the assassination of sovereign verifier. He was for 20 years an expert of how to get you declared a sovereign person. Residential school survivor and First Nations activist and advocate Stimas. And his assassination is connected, A, to First Nations justice and sovereignty activism, and or B, to Kevin Annett. You notice how all of the progressive radio programs were suddenly axed from Vancouver Co-op Radio at the time of the Bilderberger takeover by this sudden blow up around the one radio program of Kevin Annett. You notice how with Steenmaas, who was an outspoken and prolific First Nations activist, advocate, residential school survivor, and was a sovereign verifier since 1972. And he died under suspicious circumstances in which Hunter and Watzek discussed in the interview. Well, they discussed the circumstances in which his assassination was possibly connected to Annett. Kevin Annett, provocateur, non-existent elders, and tribunal personnel, appropriation, breach of trust, fraud, and possible poly-psyop globalist operative. During their nearly 2-hour interview with newsinsideout.com, ITCCS juror Alex Hunter, an activist in his own right, and WATSEC detailed multiple instances of Kevin Annett's breach of trust and fraud in behavior toward the First Nations community through the ITCCS. Provocateur. That's a typical role for an operative. Kevin Annett, a COINTELPRO operative. Kevin Annett, in many instances, acted as a provocateur when meeting with indigenous or other recruits to ITCCS, urging them to do illegal activities and yet hiding or failing to show up himself when the time arrived for these activities to take place. ITCCS juror Alex Hunter notes that Annett once urged Alex Hunter and his children to paintball a church that displayed a big photograph of the Pope, an action that would have landed Hunter in jail with possible loss of custody to his children. Non-existent elders and tribunal personnel. ITCCS juror Alex Hunter, who defended Annett publicly for some time until Annett lost his trust, states that Annett manipulated the public, the First Nations community, and the jurors with a fictitious court that he created and embellished in the fashion of a screenwriter, even creating fictitious First Nation elders and court personnel who supported and serviced the ITCCS ICLCJ. These fictitious personnel included, number one, Jeremiah Jourdain, a fictitious elder whom Annett invented, described as the belonging to various changing clans. First it was the Raven clan, then it was the Bear clan, and whom Annett uses as support in narratives ranging from ITCCS to Republic of Kanata. First Jeremiah Jourdain would, yay for ITCCS, then he would appear as, oh, the Republic of Kanata is the greatest thing since sliced bread. Whereas the Mohawks have come out and condemning the Republic of Kanata as a land grab by the Directorate, and Kevin Annett has declared himself the interim acting president of the Republic of Kanata, which now would have power over all the indigenous land. Number two, George DeFort, as a Brussels-based coordinator of the ITCCS ICLCJ, who is used to issue pronouncements from Brussels and to correspond from time to time with outsiders, including myself, newsinsideout.com reporter Alfred Lambremont Webre. These two fictitious identities, DeFort and Jeremiah, are used by Kevin Annett to give the appearance of reality to his activities and further the frauds of the ITCCS and ICLCJ. Appropriation, breach of trust, and fraud. Both former ITCCS juror Alex Hunter and WATSEC speak variously of cultural appropriations by Kevin Annett of events within First Nations and other communities that have nothing to do with Kevin Annett's organizations, that Annett appears to make a result of his own contributions. For example, in a recent public communique, Annett offers a $10,000 reward for information relating to the deaths of the, quote, following ITCCS indigenous members. Chief Louis Daniels, quote, ITCCS convener and liaison with the Ojibwe Nation, died in Winnipeg General Hospital, February 12, 2006. Second, Harriet Nahani, witness to Alberni residential school murders, died in Surrey remand prison after her arrest by RCMP, February 24, 2007. Third, Johnny Bingo Dawson, leader of ITCCS protests, died in Vancouver after being beaten by Vancouver police, December 9, 2009. Next, William Combs, witness to abduction of children by Queen of England, died in Vancouver General Hospital, February 26, 2011. Next, Ricky LaValle, witness to alleged beating to death of Bingo Dawson, he died suddenly at 12. Harry Wilson, witness to 2 murders of Alberni Residential School, died of unknown cause, May 3, 2012. None of these people had any relation to ITCCS. Kevin Annett states, Harriet Nahanni was never an ITCCS activist, nor were any of the others. Harriet died of a heart attack in custody after breaching her order not to attend or be protesting the sea-to-sky assault on the bluff, well before Kevin Annett dreamed of this ITCCS rubbish. In other words, Kevin Annett, as a good operative or as a good psychopathic individual or unethical opportunist, has gone and cherry-picked out 6 indigenous activists who were murdered and said, oh, these are ITCCS activists. And that's what he does, is he gives that label to it. And that's the mark here of the fraud and breach of trust that this either globalist activist or other does. Financial fraud and breach of trust. ITCCS, ICLCJ juror Alex Hunter discusses some of the known cases of a number of women who Kevin Annett has simultaneously romancing on the internet, some with intent to manipulate, exploit, abuse, and defraud them of their inheritance or life savings in order to support his jet-setting lifestyle while carrying out extended fraud or confidence gain of the ITCCS ICLCJ. As we stated, newsinsideout.com has received preliminary evidence regarding one such woman who was manipulated out over the course of a little less than 20 years of $150,000 by Kevin Annett to finance his lifestyle behind the cover of ITCCS ICLCJ. Kevin Annett's appropriation of the Circle of Justice in 1998. Kevin Annett's appropriation of the Circle of Justice, which was basically a citizens tribunal of conscience for the crimes committed against residential school survivors, and funds raised for the benefit of the survivors of residential schools. The Circle of Justice had a whole trial of Kevin Annett back in 1998. And that's on the internet. And we have the complete link here. The Circle of Justice issued a letter and bill of particulars and concerns that provides an earlier example of Kevin Annett's deceit and fraud on the First Nations community. The letter states, to Kevin Annett, we, the members of the group known as the Circle of Justice, hereby give you notice that you are to cease any statements, implications, or representations that you represent our group in any capacity or have any association with our group. We also hereby give you notice to cease the use of the name of the Circle of Justice or the name of any individual of the group in any association with you in any book, newspaper, on the internet, television, or through any medium or in any conversations or representations with anyone. We also give notice to you, Kevin Annett, to cease any and all fundraising in the name of the Circle of Justice and to turn over and account for any monies collected in the name of the Circle of Justice or when the name of the Circle of Justice was associated with your name in any way. We also demand that you turn over any and all materials in whatever form taken specifically through your interviews and other work with survivors of the Canadian residential schools. Next, Kevin Annett as a possible poly-psyop globalist operative. Former ITCCS juror Alex Hunter and Watsek discuss various patterns and evidence that suggest that Kevin Annett is a possible poly-psyop globalist. He's a political science graduate as well as a clergyman graduate with 6 months at the Jesuit school here in Canada. Part of his training as a cleric was to go 6 months to the Jesuit school to be trained. He's a poly-psyop globalist operative, and his fabrications, such as ITCCS and ICLCJ, may be tools of the globalists in their plans to form a one-world religion and a rollout of a genocidal and dictatorial one-world order. And then in the final sections of the interviews, we address the questions of, which are the key questions here, how can First Nations communities and our world community recover from the 20-year fraud committed by Kevin Annett and his fabricated ITCCS and prior organizations? How can child trafficking, pedophile, and ritual sacrifice networks in the churches, governments, and monarchies be prosecuted now that the ITCCS Kevin Annett fraud has been publicly and widely uncovered? The final portion of the Alex Hunter and Watsek interview deals with the complex issues of how can First Nation communities recover from the 20-year fraud committed by Kevin Annett and his fabricated ITCCS? How can child trafficking, pedophile, and ritual sacrifice networks in the churches, governments, and monarchies be prosecuted now that the ITCCS Kevin Annett fraud has been publicly and widely uncovered? In the interview, Alex Hunter and Watsek commit to continue to bring to public light and evidence from witnesses and others for broadcasts with News Inside Out and other media. And as we have committed publicly, and I'd like to say it right now, newsinsideout.com will broadcast publicly witnesses to all of the subject matters covered. That is, to child trafficking, to child sacrifice, to child genocide in the governments, monarchies, churches, the Vatican, the parliaments and Congress, the entire US government, the media, the police, the intelligence agencies, the entire worldwide, the Drangheta, the mafia, all of that, we will cover it. And we will maintain that focus. And so with the transhumanist agenda, War Crimes Tribunal, that is now forming, because it is our conviction that the interdimensional satanic pedophilia networks are, in a way, that are inside the monarchies and the governments and the courts and the parliaments, are the political base of the transhumanist agenda that is seeking to robotize humanity. So we have to go after both of those, both the political base, which runs on the child sacrificing and child trafficking networks, and on the technology, which is attempting to robotize humanity. So we ask you to keep tuned to newsinsideout.com, to email us with any tips, or if you are a witness with a desire to be broadcast, at news news@newsinsideout.com. That's news@newsinsideout.com. And to follow the development of the tribunal, which is now in its formative stages, at warcrimestribunal.org. Thank you very much for your close attention and for your patience. And don't forget that we're a new holographic positive timeline came in on December 21st, 2012. And all of these plans that had been formulated out of duality, whatever dualistic intelligence, formulated the ITCCS and that fraud, so as to block this work that is going forward now. It doesn't have any traction. And we will get to the bottom of this. And that is what is prophesized for this era, and that is what is occurring. I'm Alfred Lambremont Webre of newsinsideout.com, and it's been my pleasure to share these facts, insights, evidence, and opinion with you. Thank you very much. Season's greetings, and may you have a happy and abundant New Year 2015. Thank you.